Hey everyone, it's Aria. So today I'm going to be teaching you guys how to approach AP style questions, specifically for AP biology, which is very good preparation for my test as well. So right over here, we have the answer, but I'm going to show you guys how to get to that answer and how to approach these questions because they're definitely worded much differently than the standard honors bio or honors chem test, or even honors physics in that case, whatever you're taking. So to hold it up a little bit closer to you guys, we have the question. Lysosomes digest food particles brought into the cell by endocytosis. After a vesicle containing food particles fuses with a lysosome, H plus ions are transported into the lysosome from the cytosol. This significantly lowers the pH of the lysosome. Okay. We read a little chunk of it, but let's actually understand what we read. So to zoom in a little bit over here, we have lysosomes digest food particles brought into the cell by endocytosis. So we know their function right here, digesting food particles that are brought into the cell. So what do? Digest food particles. After a vesicle containing food particles fuses with the lysosome, so after the vesicle, which, we're bringing this into the cell, containing these food particles that are supposed to be digested by the lysosome, fuses with a lysosome, H plus ions are transported into the lysosome from the cytosol. This significantly lowers the pH of the lysosome. So let's talk about pH real quick. If you remember from your chemistry class during the pH talk, pH is supposed to, determine, your acidic or basic solution. So the lower the pH is, the more acidic you have, meaning the higher concentration of the H plus ions. And if you're more basic, you have a higher concentration of basic OH minus ions. So here we have fuses and H plus ions are transported into the lysosome from the cytosol. This lowers the pH because you're having more of those H plus ions transported relative to the cytosol and activates the enzymes that digest the particles. So now it's asking us, which of the following best predicts what will happen to the lysosomal enzymes? And what are the lysosomal enzymes used for again? To digest the food particles. If the proteins that transport H plus ions from the cytosol into the lysosome are damaged. So what will best predict what will happen to the food particle digesters if the proteins that transport the H plus ions and our proteins, they're being transported from the cytosol. So what will best happen to these enzymes if the proteins that transport the H plus ions are damaged? Like, what will happen to that? So let's go back to our function. With this, from the cytosol, it transports the H plus ions, right? The H plus ions significantly lower the pH. The lower the pH, the reason why these lysosomes are able to digest food particles is because there's a lower pH. So if you have a lower pH, then the more acidic it is, it'll be able to digest. So it's pretty much saying if this entire process stops, what's going to happen? So now let's look at all of our answer choices here. We have the lysosomal enzymes will not become active since there will be no active transport of H plus ions. So now we understand the prompt. The entire idea is to be able to answer it before you actually look at your answer choices. The lysosomal enzymes will not become active since H plus ions will diffuse out of the lysosome. The lysosome enzymes will become active since facilitated diffusion will move H plus ions into the lysosome, and the lysosomal enzymes will become active since passive diffusion will move H plus ions into the lysosome. Something I want you guys to look out for here, you want to be able to eliminate as much as you can. Already by looking at this question, I can eliminate that they'll become active because it's saying that the way that they're able to digest these food particles is by the transport of these H plus ions. So after the vesicle containing the food particles fuses with them, they're transported into the lysosome, which lowers the pH relative to the cytosol that digests the particles. So if that's not available, then the lysosome won't be able to digest the particles. The lysosomal enzymes won't be able to digest them, which means that they will not become active. So you can already cross out any answer choices that state that the lysosomal enzymes would be active. So now we're left with two other answer choices. We've already crossed that out. Now that makes it a little bit easier, especially on a timed test like so. The lysosomal enzymes will not become active since there will be no active transport of H plus ions. And we have the lysosomal enzymes will not become active since H+ ions will diffuse out of the lysosome. So, answer choice A is telling us because there will be no active transport of H+ ions, the lysosomal enzymes will not be active. This is saying since H+ ions will diffuse out of the lysosome, they'll not be active because they're diffusing out of the lysosome. But here's the thing that I want you to catch right away. They were never in the lysosome. The only reason why these H+ ions were in the lysosome was because they were transported from the cytosol. So if there are no proteins that can transport the H+ ions into the lysosome, then they would never be in there. So how would something diffuse out of something if it was never in there in the first place? So if the process that puts it in there in the first place, concentrates it with those H+ ions in the first place, makes the pH acidic, stops working, they can't diffuse out. And I know you might think, okay, what about what's already there? But it's not already there. It's saying, okay, if this process never even happened, it can't happen because if these proteins are damaged, like it just can't happen. And you know when proteins are damaged, it affects function because structure determines function. So then we already know, okay, they can't diffuse out of the lysosome. That would not work. Even though they will not become active, that's correct. But there are no H+ ions in there that can diffuse out because what's diffusing them in there in the first place is not going to work. So then we know our only answer choice would be the lysosome enzymes will not become active since there will be no active transport of H+ ions. Because there will be no active transport of H+ ions, which are being actively transported into the lysosome from the cytosol, that's it. And the reason why you know it's active transport goes against the gradient, low to high concentration. And you're trying to, go from a low concentration, putting it into a higher concentration, not going out. It can't diffuse out of the cell unless you already have it in there. So there will be no active transport of the H+ ions. This won't work. It won't, if it's damaged, you won't be able to transport H+ ions. So look out for that word if the proteins that transport H+ ions. And you have this answer choice that says transport. So you see that keyword. All right, thank you guys for watching and good luck.